My so-called father lifted his champagne at my sister's wedding, looked straight at me, and called me the family's charity case. 200 guests laughed. The string quartet played on. He had no idea that the following Monday, I would walk into his boardroom carrying a yellow envelope that proved every single thing he had ever told me about myself was a lie. He thought that toast was the punchline. He had no idea who was about to sit at the head of his table, or what she would put on it. Welcome back to Lineage of Lies, where the secrets families bury have a way of crawling out, and the truth always gets the last word. My name is Claire. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And be sure to subscribe. My sister Madeline got married on a Saturday in June. The venue was a restored barn that cost more than my annual rent. I wore a navy dress I had stitched up myself the night before because I refused to let my stepmother see me in borrowed clothes again. I was 29, a freelance illustrator who could barely afford the gas to drive there, and I sat near the back, exactly where they expected me to sit. My father, I still called him Dad then, was Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford & Co., a publishing house his older brother Marcus had founded 40 years ago. Marcus died before I was born. Richard had run the company ever since, and he wore that fact like a crown. At the reception, I found my place card at table 12, by the kitchen door, next to a second cousin who asked me if I was still doing those little drawings. Richard took the microphone. He toasted Madeline, his real daughter, as he'd always called her. He talked about how proud he was of the woman she'd become, how she'd soon join the company as vice president, how the Ashford name would finally have the air it deserved. Then his eyes swept the room and landed on me. And of course, we have Claire, he said, smiling. Our little artist. We keep hoping she'll find a real career, but until then, well, family takes care of its mistakes, doesn't it? Laughter. Polite, scattered, mortifying laughter. Madeline looked at her lap. My stepmother touched his arm, not to stop him, but because she'd heard this script before and approved. I set down my fork. I didn't stand up. I didn't correct him. I had spent 29 years learning that visibility in this family was a trap, and I had learned to be invisible. But there was something he didn't know. A week earlier, on my late mother's birthday, I had finally opened the letter she'd left me. She'd given it to me on her deathbed when I was 12, sealed, with strict instructions: open it when you're ready to know the truth. I had carried it unopened for 17 years because I was afraid of what it would do to the little stability I had left. That week, I'd finally slit the envelope in my apartment at 2 a.m, and what I read had rearranged every atom of my life. Richard Ashford was not my father. My real father was Marcus Ashford, Richard's older brother, the brilliant, quiet founder of the company. My mother had worked as his editor. They had fallen in love. He died of an aneurysm 3 months before I was born, and my mother, young and frightened and with nowhere to go, had married Richard for the sake of giving me a name. Richard had always known. He'd taken us in not out of kindness but because that marriage gave him control of the company my real father had built. And the letter included one more thing, a trust document, witnessed and notarized, stating that when I turned 30, which was 4 days after the wedding, I would inherit 51% of the voting shares of Ashford & Co. My real father had built the company. My mother had kept the deed, metaphorically, in her own name. And the man who'd spent my whole life calling me a mistake had no idea that his entire empire sat on a foundation that belonged to me. At the wedding, I kept my seat. I smiled at the cousin. I let the moment pass. Because I knew that on Monday morning, everything was about to change. I drove home that night across dark back roads in a car that smelled of old coffee, and I let myself finally feel the weight of the secret I was carrying. For 17 years I'd told myself a story, that if I was just good enough, talented enough, self-sufficient enough, Richard would one day see me as his daughter. That I could earn my way into the Ashford name. The wedding toast had shattered that. You can't earn your way into a family that was built on a lie. The lie needed me to be small. My mother's letter had done more than reveal a fact, it had revealed a door. She wrote, in her small, steady handwriting, the truth doesn't need to shout, Claire. It only needs to be spoken. Don't let anyone price you by a story they invented. I got home at midnight and sat in my car, looking at the single light on in my apartment window. Then I called the number my mother had left, a family lawyer named Lena. Lena was the only person who sent me a birthday card every year without a check inside, just a handwritten note that said, "When you're ready." She answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. Lena didn't sound surprised. She sounded like a woman who had been holding a door open for 17 years and was finally feeling the breeze. "I know about the board meeting on Monday," she said. "They're voting on a merger. Ashford and Cole is about to be absorbed by a conglomerate that'll strip it for parts. Richard and Madeline will walk away wealthy, everyone else will lose their jobs. Richard's calling it the deal of a lifetime." "He doesn't have the votes," I said. "No," she said, with a dry warmth I'd missed my whole childhood. "You do. 51%. The moment you walk in, the merger is dead. He can't do a thing without your signature." I sat in the dark for a long time after we hung up. I had the power to burn down his whole world. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't tempted. Monday morning, I dressed like myself. A simple blouse, no armor. I pulled my hair back and I didn't try to look like a CEO. I was an artist walking into a boardroom, and that was precisely the point. The Ashford and Cole offices occupied the top floor of a glass building downtown. Richard's portrait hung in the lobby, a portrait I now understood belonged to someone else. I walked past it, clutching the yellow envelope, and took the elevator up. The conference room was all mahogany and leather. Richard sat at the head of the table, Madeline at his right hand, a team of lawyers and executives flanking them. The merger documents were spread across the polished wood like a feast. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. Richard looked up. For a second, he was merely confused. Then irritated. "Claire, what on earth are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting. If you need money again, make an appointment." I didn't answer. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the one without a place card, and I sat down. Then I opened my envelope and laid the documents on the table one by one, my birth certificate listing Marcus Ashford as my father, the trust deed, the share registry. A woman from legal picked up the trust deed, read it, and went pale. "Richard," she said quietly, "she holds 51%. The silence in that room was complete. Madeline's smile froze and crumbled. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a horror so deep I could almost see the floor dropping out from under him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Marcus never." "He did," I said. My voice was level. The same voice I used to talk about my art at a gallery opening. "He left the company to his daughter." "You knew." "You've known for 29 years. That's why you kept me close enough to control but far enough to despise. You called me a mistake because the truth was too dangerous to speak." He gripped the edge of the table. "What do you want?" It was the first time in my life a man who had spent decades telling me I was worthless had asked me what I wanted. And the room waited, pens frozen, the merger documents suddenly meaningless. I looked at Richard. I looked at Madeline, who still could not meet my eyes. And I understood that the revenge I could take right now, the humiliation, the destruction, would feel righteous for about 5 minutes, and then it would feel exactly like becoming them. My mother's letter had said, "Don't let anyone price you by a story they invented." That included the story of revenge. "I'm not here to destroy the company," I said. "I'm here to save it. The merger is dead. We're not selling. We're going to reinvest, protect the employees, and bring the business back to what my father intended. You will step down as CEO." Richard's voice splintered. "Claire. Marcus always said you'd be the strong one." The room went impossibly still. For one bare second, he wasn't my adversary. He was a grieving brother who had buried his guilt under decades of cruelty, and the mask had finally slipped. I could see the tired, frightened man underneath. I held his gaze and did not let the softening become surrender. "I am not your mistake," I said, my voice quiet as a pencil line. "I am Marcus Ashford's daughter. And I'm finally here to sign for what he left me." I picked up a pen from the table, a heavy silver pen I later learned had belonged to my real father, and I signed the proxy that blocked the merger and appointed an independent board. Then, before I stood, Madeline spoke for the first time. Her voice was so small I almost missed it. "He never said I'd earned anything either." I looked at her. She wasn't looking at Richard. She was looking at her own hands, folded on the merger documents. The same hands she'd spent a lifetime trying to make perfect enough for a man who would never say the words she needed. And in that moment, she wasn't the golden daughter anymore. She was just another woman who had been measured with a broken ruler. "Madeline can keep her position," I said, still looking at her, "if she earns it. Not inherits it." She lifted her eyes, finally, and gave me the smallest nod. It wasn't an apology. It was an opening. I pushed the documents across the table, left the yellow envelope for whoever wanted to stare at the truth, and walked out. The merger never happened. Ashford and Cole restructured, Richard retired quietly, and the 200 employees he would have sacrificed kept their jobs and their pensions. I didn't take a corner office. I didn't put my name on the door. I hired good people to run the company, and I went back to my rented apartment and my drawing board. Madeline called me a month later. Not to apologize, exactly, but to ask if we could start over. I said yes, not because she'd earned it, but because I refused to sketch her in the same harsh lines our father had used on me. The drawing is rough. We're both learning to shade. I keep my real father's silver pen on my desk, next to a small photograph of my mother. I still use it to sign my illustrations, not contracts, just art. It fits my hand perfectly, like it was waiting. On the wall above my desk, I framed a single line from my mother's letter: "The truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be spoken." And beside it, I hung a small sketch of a door I drew the night I finally opened her envelope. The door isn't grand. It's just open, with light spilling through. That's how a quiet artist got the last word, not with a raised voice, not by burning anyone down, but by holding the truth in her hands and refusing to let it be buried any longer. The lies that shape us don't have to define us. If you've ever been priced by a story that wasn't yours, this one was for you. If someone in your life ever tried to write you out of your own history, know that the truth has a way of finding the light. Subscribe to Lineage of Lies, where the quiet ones finally get the last word, and it is never the one anyone expected. I'll see you at the next story.